Namaskar and a very warm welcome to this exclusive episode of Sabka Budget, the Budget Campus, which we are going to bring to you exclusively from Indian School of Business, Gachibowli, Hyderabad, from the sprawling campuses of ISB. In fact, 29th in the world, currently ranked by Financial Times. And I'm Sakal Bhatt. Well, in the next 1 hour, let me quickly give you a quick lowdown as to what all we're going to talk about. 360-degree overall expectations as far as the Union Budget 2016-17 is concerned. And in the next 1 hour, the big ideas coming from the IT capital of the country, Hyderabad, the deliverables that we are looking at. We will be talking about what all does it really take to make India the startup capital of the world. And we will also be talking about the country being projected or coming up as the IT superpower in the world in terms of hardware and software, the premier destination that country is looking at to be when we talk about the global rankings are concerned. We will be talking about pragmatic push to government's signature campaigns like Digital India and Make in India, Swachh Bharat, all that is concerned. Banking sector, tax regime, what all is expected in that space. And also when we talk about the urban planning and policies, which has become the core of the national agenda, and especially smart cities taking the center stage, what all is on expected lines, the voices, the ideas coming from Hyderabad. And now it's time to get to know about our panelists on the show.
Milind Sohoni, faculty member in the Operations Management Group here at the Indian School of Business. I also serve as the Senior Associate Dean for Academic Programs at ISB. I am an operations researcher with focus areas which include aviation, logistics and supply chain management, and non-profit operations.
Krishnamurthy Subramanian, Professor of Finance at the Indian School of Business. My research interests are in the area of banking, finance, innovation and law and economics.
Deepa Mani, a faculty at the Indian School of Business with research interests in the role of technology in urban transformation. I'm also the Executive Director of the Srini Raju Center for Technology and the Networked Economy, a research center here at ISB that fosters research, education and outreach in the area of ICT.
Hi, I'm Tarun Jain. I'm an Assistant Professor of Economics at the Indian School of Business. I'm very passionate about the young people of India and making sure that they have the skills and education to succeed in India's new economy. This is what I do research on, and this is also the interest that I bring to the classroom as part of my teaching.
Welcome all of you to the show. Deepa, let me quickly start with you with the startup thing, because this whole idea seems to be catching up very fast with young India particularly. There's a lot of talk about this time around. Are we looking at the tax holiday, something which we expected or experimented in 90s. In the budget, as far as startups and their implementation is concerned, what are your thoughts on it?
So first off, I think, we must acknowledge that a fair bit has been done by this government as, in the direction of fostering an ecosystem that will help startups. There is both in terms of creating a hub of sorts which provides mentoring and direction to startups. There's an allocation of around 150 odd crores, I think, for just technology companies. There was, I'm talking about the previous budget, there was, there's now this corpus of fund of funds, so to speak, to provide risk and growth capital for startups to take off. I think what is, we need more in a couple of directions. One is, as you mentioned, maybe tax breaks, to foster innovation. Also, less stringency in disclosure requirements, reporting requirements for a few years after the startup has been initiated. I think all of those would be useful.
For the ease of doing business.
For ease of doing. I mean, why is a Flipkart registered in Singapore and why not in India, right? So those are questions that I think we should ask ourselves.
In terms of IT penetration, Shubhu, what are your thoughts? The papers are suggesting that, it's still 20% lot needs to be covered on those grounds, especially when we talk about the rural penetration of information technology. Well, do you think that's still a very big challenge? And when we look at the upcoming budget, what is the allocation? What are we expecting on those lines?
So Sakal, let me just start out by actually pointing out some key numbers about how well we've done so far. With about 4,200 startups, we are ranked third in the world in terms of the number of startups. Also, over the last 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, about $18 billion has been poured into the startup initiative, out of which about $9 billion just this year alone, which means we actually have put in a lot of money into really invigorating the startup ecosystem. I want to point out
on the right trajectory, you mean?
Yes, I want to point out a couple of things that are really critical in this. If you want to take, really generate a good bang for the buck that we've invested here. First, first is the fact that, we generally think about, when we think about startups, we think about the Flipkarts of the world, the big baskets, etc. Right. But equally important are the startups that happen in rural India, the Bharat as we know, because those are the startups that create the jobs. Those are the startups that actually provide employment for the self-employed individuals, and therefore it is really critical that that's where the IT penetration
so
becomes
Bandhan
really critical.
And the concept of Bandhan comes into picture, and since just struck me, you're associated with that. How is it really shaping up? I mean, a quick report card on the Bandhan on ground in reality.
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, because it's really important. If startups in the rural sector have to be actually empowered, then microfinance becomes really critical. And as being involved with Bandhan, we've actually seen the kind of really impact that microfinance creates on the ground.
Yes.
When a government formulates its budget, it takes into consideration the various macroeconomic changes that is happening across the globe. Now, if you look at what is happening in China, which is plateauing at a growth rate of just about less than 7%, translating into a lower demand for commodities and pushing the commodities prices further down, and the fact that oil is trading at just less than $30 a barrel, I think Indian government in the coming fiscal should invest a lot of amount into building infrastructure using these commodities as the inputs. It will help in two ways. One, definitely it will improve the infrastructure. Two, it will act as a strong catalyst to the Make in India proposal, which India has.
Make in India is also going to figure out in the discussion, but a little later.
One of my friend had a startup, and they were really technically strong, but the point was they had no idea about the tax and the legal regulations. So even within a year of starting an operation, they were hit by service tax notices and excise duty notices, and they couldn't continue business. So that's something which we have to really look at, like bringing about regulations which will help them concentrate on what is needed, and rather than focusing on, say, a service tax or an excise duty law. So that kind of an environment which makes it easier for business is something which the budget should look at.
Okay, point taken. Milind, yes.
Right. And I mean, you're entirely right? I mean, everybody has been looking at the implementation of the GST that is to happen this year. And to me, that is going to be quite critical to the way some of these businesses are actually going to function and scale up. Because, once that implementation comes through, you're going to see consolidation in the market, and you're going to see very different types of supply chains evolve, right? And the risks then that different entities are going to actually bear when these new supply chains come in through. And I think understanding that and, actually then creating a budget that accounts for some of those risks that, different entities will place and promote this sector is going to be critical.
But Milind, I'll come to Harit you, but before that, because since we're talking about the whole startup implementation and way forward, how crucial and important is now eventual rollout of the GST and also creating a very important technology backbone for the GST? Are we looking at it in a big way in this budget?
In this budget, so the GST has already been accepted, and that is supposed to be implemented this year. The real question is that how is it going to be implemented, and what are its repercussions for e-commerce businesses and regular businesses itself. And the biggest point in favor of going to this GST implementation itself is you will get away from this double taxation, right? And that will simplify the way supply chains actually work, and the operating costs will actually go down in my mind. And I think that is critical, because that will level the playing field itself.
Harit, yes, your point, please.
I just want to touch the fact that in IT the problem right now is that when you sell a software across the state, is it classified as a product or is it classified as a service? And that taxation differs. So again, in GST, that thing will be taken care of. So I think GST is an important piece in this whole debate.
Yes.
As Milind pointed out, the lowering costs because of compliance variation across different states is absolutely critical. This is the way that we take advantage of scale, that India is going to be one market, one consumer market, one supplier market, instead of being a different market in each different state. The GST is absolutely critical.
Okay, yes, Shubh, please.
So, I want to actually add on the GST. I think as economists, we really think that it is value adding. The real issue here is the politics of it, not the economics as much. I think all of us agree that this is something which is a forward-moving step, really integrates markets, does away with a lot of embedded taxes and even hidden taxes. But what is critical here is, I think, for the current government to actually to highlight that the previous government did not do enough in terms of trying to get everybody on board.
Okay. Basically, want to point out that all these schemes which the government is coming up with, whether it is GST or Digital India or Make in India or Skilling India, how does it have an impact on the agriculture and healthcare sectors? Because these are the two main things which cannot wait. Everything else can wait, but how does Startup India help?
If there's one place where I'd say the finance minister should invest, perhaps eliminating communicable diseases is the highest ROI that the finance minister could ever invest in this country. So communicable diseases are absolutely important. What we should also consider is the immense growth in non-communicable diseases. So for example, type 2 diabetes in India is exploding. We should think about how do we get to the preventive stage in a lot of these non-communicable diseases, whether it's cardiovascular, diabetes, so on and so forth, rather than curative. Right? The government has an important role in prevention, and ultimately I think the private sector will take care of curative.
So one more point here is that Digital India can play a very important role in the leakages which happen in the healthcare industry.
Okay.
So all the fraudulent, whether it is RSBY or Arogyashri or any other government schemes, there's a lot of leakage, a lot of fraudulent claims at all levels, whether it is the hospitals or the patients themselves or the diagnostic centers. If we can bring all of them together on one platform and try to stop the leakages, it would make the schemes much more effective.
Okay, all right. Now let's move on from infrastructure and information technology to the tax regime. Are we looking at predictable taxation breaks? Are we looking at non-adversarial issues out there? And when we talk about corporate tax and MAT, what all is really expected in this particular budget? Let's have some viewpoints from the audience. Yes.
Okay, so I'll be talking from the media and entertainment perspective. Professor Subbu was talking about what will be included as a purview of GST. When we talk about media and entertainment space, the indirect taxes are so high that it ranges anywhere between 30 to 70% what the cable operators and the DTH operators have to pay over and above the service tax, which is the 12.36%. Now, number one, the taxes need to be eased down for this industry. This industry has been marred down forever with increasing tax rates. And also, it's yet to be seen what will be covered in the purview of GST. So as it's implemented this year.
Who would like to react on it, and also the tax issue that was raised?
We talk about, for instance, even in Digital India, right? We talk about a national fiber optic cable network and connecting 2.5 lakh gram panchayats and, getting access to technology. But how, that's one issue of access. But are these people skilled enough to use this and, utilize them in a meaningful way? That's not clear. So I think all of this will have to be complemented with initiatives like the National Digital Literacy Mission is a great initiative, which not only says we need physical infrastructure, but we need to enable people to use the physical infrastructure and access it.
Some considerable amount of chunk needs to be devoted to spreading digital literacy.
But also to add to that, right? I mean, the point that you raised and what Deepa was also mentioning. See, there is this focus on Stand in India, right? I mean, where there is an emphasis of developing women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs in villages, right? And trying to get skills to them so that they can actually then be included into the mainstream and kind of a financial inclusion kind of an idea where, you can get these people on board. And I think there has to be not only strengthening, but an additional allocation for developing that sector and developing entrepreneurs over there itself. It's not just about reaching them, but it is also about creating value over there itself. Right? So
I think you have triggered stream of thoughts from the audience. Let's quickly hear them. Yes, quickly.
I absolutely agree with you, Prof. What we have seen in the last couple of budgets is there's this focus on attracting FDI and FII into India because these funds they can relocate. But we lose focus of the fact that there's this family business, which is a very strong sector in India, and there's a need to strengthen that.
Okay.
And these are some of the ways in which the finance minister may address this sector.
Okay.
See, what you have to realize is when you're talking about a market for art, let's say, that is, one part of capital markets in general. Comparing New York vis-a-vis India is actually not an apples-to-apples comparison because we have here actually capital markets that aren't very well developed. So, while art may be important for an artist, what we also care about actually is bringing credit where ideas are there. And, in that, we have actually made significant steps. Over the last couple of years, the fact that we've licensed almost 23 banks, including 2 universal banks, is something that will actually encourage competition in the banking sector and will thereby actually bring more credit, because it is a fact that in India there is a lot of credit rationing, as economists like saying, which means that people who deserve credit don't necessarily get credit.
Have some points on NPA non-performing assets from the audience, but before that somebody wanted to speak something here.
So my question is to Professor Subbu. This is according to me, digitization plays a very major role in curbing black money in India, but still we have service charges in credit card payments, which is not helping people actually pay electronically. So what are your views on that?
I think that's an excellent point that you've actually raised. In particular, we should be moving towards encouraging more credit card transactions and actually disincentivizing cash transactions, because that will bring a lot of the black money into the economy. On the black money issue, I also want to point out that actually there are, after this government has come into power, there are a few tax treaties have been signed with countries that actually are serve as tax havens, but there needs to be a lot more speeding up on that. If we look internationally, close to 200 tax treaties have been, bipartite treaties have been signed, but India actually being involved in those is minuscule. So we need to really move on those. One, really credible commitment towards bringing black money, and in check might be towards actually, signing these tax treaties and therefore checking the flow of black money.
Some innovation in this space, and I think this is a nice experiment if you know about e-wallets, right? And the way the e-commerce firms are actually tackling this issue, where you can actually get to cashless transactions. I think it's worth watching and worth watching their success.
So how do we make this e-commerce thing more flexible and forward-looking?
One of the most innovative ideas is simply getting rid of the 1,000 rupee note.
Right.
That will encourage a lot of digital transactions and also curb black money, because a lot of black money is simply stored in 1,000 rupee notes. We should get rid of them.
Okay. I hope FM is listening. Yes, quickly.
Actually, it's the RBI.
Yes.
Yeah, just taking on from Professor's point, I wanted to highlight on the issue of innovation. And innovation in infrastructure is something that probably has not caught the government's mind. Just to bring forth the point, there are several central research institutes which are working in isolation. You look at the Central Road Research Institute, the Central Drug Research Institute, the Central Scientific and Industrial Research Institute. What is their contribution to the innovation aspect is anybody's guess.
Prithvi, very quickly, yes.
I have a question for Professor Tarun. From economics point of view, whether government should provide tax breaks, tax holidays to few industries or few companies at the expense of taxpayers, because what happens is it makes companies to depend on the government, or maybe reduce the tax on public.
I actually agree with him completely and completely disagree with my colleagues. There should be no tax breaks for any startup or any other kind of industrial sector. Every tax break on one company is a tax expense on another. What is critical is that there should be uniform taxes levied transparently using digital tools, regardless of which industry or stage of the firm it is in. And so in that sense, Prithvi's point is absolutely correct.
Milan, quickly, then we have more points
but
from
that's
him.
exactly what I wanted to say. That it's not enough to just say that you'll create a uniform tax base, because the challenges are actually at the back end, right? And if people or firms are disadvantaged doing business, you've got to cut them some slack. So either you do it through these tax breaks, which seems to be the easy way out, or you level the playing field, you improve your infrastructure at the back end, and then get to a uniform tax code. And I think that's a better solution.
Yes. Let's hear some more pointers from here. Yes, Abdul.
So I think Professor is pointing towards a Ricardian economy. The ghost of tax comes back to us and to the consumers once again. I think we're focusing too much on the tax part of the government generating revenue.
I want to have your views on service tax. What are your thoughts on service tax? What's expected on those lines? Let's talk a bit about that as well.
So basically, what I was trying to bring out is when we focus on the government sources of earning, that is the revenue for the government, obviously there are tax incomes and there are non-tax incomes. All that we are focusing on at this point in time is taxable income that the government is generating. What about the non-tax sources of income which the Indian government can make? For example, we are not making a lot of revenues from fines and implementation of laws and violations of the same. So what is your opinion about the same?
Okay.
So in fact, on this, let me add, I'm going to sort of, raise a holy cow, taxing agricultural income. This is a holy cow that every government of its day has just completely, shown a Nelson's eye to. Agricultural income, actually, as it turns out, it's taxing agricultural income, I think, can benefit small farmers, because what we are looking at is small farmers are oftentimes financially excluded. They don't have any credible source of showing their income that I earned this much to be able to go and get a loan. And as it turns out, not taxing agricultural income.
So what are your
only
recommendations in that space to have that inclusive, bring them in the mainstream? You're talking about the agricultural community, we're talking about farmers.
So what I'm actually advocating here is a minimum alternative tax on agriculture, which is maybe 6-7%. But what it would do is to make farmers actually file tax returns. Tax returns are an excellent document to show your taxable income, and therefore use that to get a loan. Currently what happens is a lot of lending on the priority sector, 18% of it, as we know, actually has to go into the priority sector, is done based on non-quantifiable sources of income, and which then actually really sort of puts the farmer at the mercy of the loan officer. You can't expect people just to teach and then expect them to publish.
You cannot talk about taxing the agriculture sector without a discussion of the productivity of that particular sector. And it takes like 250 million odd people to produce the same output, unfortunately, Tarun. The 2 million people produce in the US. So in some sense we need to also shift people from that sector.
How do we do that, and where do we take them?
You have to move them to services. Services has seen growth in, it's seen growth in income. It's been wage inflation significantly in the services sector without commensurate growth in employment. Right. So, you need people to move to the services sector from this extremely unproductive agriculture sector. I think that there needs to be some discussion of that, as a prelude to discussing the taxation of that particular sector.
It's easy said than done. I mean, that actually goes to the entire issue of skilling and how do we create that transition plan. And to me that's a bigger challenge, right? I mean, and particularly I don't agree services. I think India, if it is looking at Make in India and if it's looking at manufacturing, I would say manufacturing is where they should think of. However, the fixed costs are far more.
It's the wage inflation and
I understand that.
When we talk about service tax, the real issue still remains assessments, delay in assessments, the refund of the tax is concerned. For the Aam Aadmi issue, I mean, what is he really looking at? His expectations, his wish list to make this entire process, Abdul, I can feel you have a point here, to make this entire process a little easy, user-friendly, more automated perhaps, and more standardized. We are talking about the service tax expectations from Aam Aadmi. Abdul.
Yeah, so as far as Aam Aadmi is concerned, I think TDS is one of the important things that an Aam Aadmi looks into consideration. 10% is deducted from the salary and goes into the TDS account. And at the end of the financial year, we file our income tax return and we file for a return of that amount, which comes 6 to 8 months later in our account. Yeah, so that is something which is very critical for an Aam Aadmi who's earning less than 10 lakh rupees or 5 lakh rupees for that matter.
Anybody else? Yes, from here? On tax? Yes, service tax?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that probably the Digital India campaign can be used to reduce the transaction cost and also influence the ease of filing returns, which will act as a big incentive, even to educated people.
I think something that will really have a huge impact is, trying to incentivize, non-cash transactions. It will expand the tax base and at the same time also reduce the, menace of black economy in this country.
May I be facetious and request that universities be exempt from service tax?
Absolutely. All of us would actually say. And not-for-profit ones
innovation-driven research universities.
I think this calls break, because from here on, from service tax and rationalization of corporate tax issue, we will now be, in fact, moving on to the next big idea when we talk about the urban development and planning, and in that, the smart cities mission taking the center stage, because that also forms the core, in fact, one of the cores as far as the national agenda of the current ruling dispensation led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is concerned. What is expected on those lines in the forthcoming Union Budget 2016? After this break.
भैया, ये खराब वाला निकालिए, दूसरा डालिए।
पापा। अरे, मुन्नी को तो तेज बुखार है। मैं ये काम निपटा कर आता हूँ, तुम इसे अस्पताल ले जाओ।
अस्पताल? नहीं।
अरे?
आप समझते नहीं हैं, इलाज कम, बीमारियां ज्यादा होती हैं वहाँ।
ले जाइए बीबी जी, अस्पताल के हालात बदल रहे हैं।
अस्पताल में गंदगी हो सकती है, कुछ छूना मत और बीमार पड़ जाओगी। ये भी ना समझते ही नहीं।
अरे दीदी, अब सब बदल रहा है।
हाँ? इतनी साफ सफाई?
जी, हम सब ने मेहनत की है। ताकि आपके इलाज में कोई कमी ना आए।
बदल रहा है, बदल रहे हैं। स्वास्थ्य केंद्र अब स्वच्छ हो रहे हैं और ये आपके ब्लॉक में भी संभव है। बस पहल करनी पड़ेगी, हमको और आपको भी।
आप घर चले?
सब ठीक?
हाँ, मैंने तो कहा था अस्पताल चलते हैं, आप ही नहीं समझते।
स्वच्छता का संकल्प करें, स्वास्थ्य केंद्र का कायाकल्प।
एक इम्पोर्टेंट मैसेज, सेट टॉप बॉक्स लगवाने की आखिरी तारीख निकल चुकी है। तो अब क्रिकेट कभी भी बंद हो सकता है।
अब ये भी बता दे सेट टॉप बॉक्स कौन सा लगाना है?
सिंपल है, सेट टॉप बॉक्स मतलब डिश टीवी, क्योंकि डिश टीवी ही 10 करोड़ लोगों की पसंद है। डिश टीवी के साथ अपना मनोरंजन खुद चुनिए, पैक सिर्फ 99 रुपए से शुरू। सेट टॉप बॉक्स मतलब डिश टीवी।
आइए ही मैडम, क्या दिखाऊं आपको?
पहले बताइए, आप BIS सर्टिफाइड ज्वेलर हैं?
क्या जी?
आपकी ज्वेलरी पर BIS और हॉलमार्क का निशान है?
हैं?
आपके पास मैग्नीफाइंग ग्लास है?
आप जासूस है क्या मैडम?
जी नहीं, एक जागरूक ग्राहक। आप भी जागरूक ग्राहक बनिए। ज्वेलरी की खरीदारी करते समय ये सब जरूर जांच लें।
जागो ग्राहक जागो।
दीदी ये देखो।
H1N1 फ्लू को फैलने से रोका जा सकता है। खांसी और छींक के बाद और बच्चे को छूने से पहले अपने हाथों को साबुन से धोकर H1N1 फ्लू को फैलने से रोक सकते हैं। इन्फेक्शन रोको, बनो हीरो। इलाज सिर्फ चुने हुए अस्पतालों में उपलब्ध।
Welcome back to Sabka Budget, and now we're talking about smart cities, and it's being said that it marks a paradigm shift when we talk the whole concept of urban planning and development, because that's something which also figures very prominently on the national agenda of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi-led government. But what exactly is the concept of smart cities? Deepa, so much has been talked about it and, written about it. Fresh spaces, green space, great sanitation, great facilities, brilliant infrastructure, all that sounds so nice, but how much of the ground is covered?
I think it will be an important area of focus in the current budget, and if we look at this recent identification of the 20 cities, who've been selected, so to speak, to be developed as smart hubs, there's an outlay of around 50,000 crores, and just to put that money in perspective, it's around 2,500 crore per city, and it cost us the same amount to build the Hyderabad airport. I think what you will see happening is perhaps setting up, maybe the central government will be, it'll be a worthwhile effort to set up something like, to use the money to set up like a network of governing bodies that for these 20 cities can help cities identify, what is their unique investment areas, priorities, because each of these 20 cities is in very different stages of development.
So when you have technology in the center of it, we're talking about smart cities, big picture, the question or perhaps the challenge also comes livable cities. I mean, It might sound extremely great on paper, but then in terms of maybe like social yardsticks, you cannot have something brilliant in terms of physical infrastructure, but then you have a swanky railway station, but then it's dirt and spitfalls all over. So how do we counter that challenge? Shubhu and Milind. Milind first? Yeah.
So I want to actually take up on that, right? So there are two things. Should we actually take our current cities and make them smart, or should we think of new cities that can eventually become smart and actually, make all these infrastructure available? Because we have an incumbency problem, and as Deepa rightly points out, each of these cities are at very different, resource consumption levels and the way they have been developed, right? And we need to make these cities sustainable, both from an environmental perspective as well as resource consumption perspective. And I think that's a huge challenge. I mean, I don't know whether this budget is enough or not, but I mean, things like, solar power, or, how should we actually start thinking of alternate ways of, getting energy consumption here, the way we utilize water, the way we utilize any other, of our resources, because it just seems like a huge challenge, and we have to be really, critical in the way we think through some of this while getting to these points.
I have a question here, because this just prompted this thought in my head. Investment in urban space on the basis of competition, and then on the basis of that competition you're selecting smart cities. How good or bad is that going to be in real terms? Because vis-a-vis the challenge that we talked about, smart cities being livable cities.
So let me just actually ask, and answer, why do we need smart cities? If you think about it, take the campus that we're shooting here. All of us live and work here. So we walk, our walk to office is 5 minutes. And not only do we have excellent physical infrastructure, we have excellent digital infrastructure. For example, I can use my iPad not only in my office, anywhere over here. And what does that do actually? That helps people like us who were educated abroad to actually come back and live here. And that's exactly what you will be able to do through smart cities, by getting excellent people with very good skilling, that reverse brain drain, if you will. So get people from abroad actually who have been exposed to ecosystems there to come and work, and thereby actually enhance our productivity. So that's something which will really be useful in terms of the smart cities.
Okay.
Now the question in terms of, should we be focusing on making existing cities smart or actually trying to create new cities? I think the latter is a better option, because you face a lot of legacy problems when we try to make an existing city smart.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a different perspective on this. The smartest cities are those which, and the smartest people in the world are the people of India, right? So what I would like is that smart cities, and as well as all other cities, start to use the digital infrastructure in which India is very good to improve governance. So for instance, I would like for us to use the digital infrastructure to connect citizens to bureaucrats and politicians. We can use this in many ways. Can we use social media, Twitter, Facebook, to say solve problems when there are floods or other kinds of natural disasters? Can we use different kinds of apps on phones to solve traffic problems in Bangalore? These are all common problems that we all face. The amount of infrastructure and investment required is fairly small, but it does require a different mindset. And I hope that the Smart Cities program really focuses on that different mindset, because the rupee cost of putting in that infrastructure is very low, but the transformation that this can bring about is very high.
When you have World Bank and ADB, any one of you, when you have World Bank and ADB willing to partner in this mega project, and if you look at the last year budget allocation, 7,060 crore with ease on FDI norms. Today, when we look at 2016-17, are we looking at bigger figures than this, and the whole international financial institutions being more than willing to partner India in Smart Cities project?
So on the FDI, I actually want to point out that some of...
No, but first the budget allocation, should it be more than what we had last time?
In terms of for smart cities, I guess I'm going to build on what Tarun was saying. It's not necessarily providing more money, but using that money better. For instance, he was talking about creating these low cost investments that actually can generate enough return. So rather than trying to allocate more money, I would advocate utilizing that money really well. There is, I think, a large allocation already.
Milind, yes.
But that actually goes. So we need not start. Every city has to achieve this, right? I mean, you really have to define what smart city means for different cities, right? And that could be, very focused projects or focused initiatives for which the money requirement may not be as high. But the way smart cities has been laid out and the way the definition seems that you're trying to encompass all of this for every city, and I think that is the real confusion over here, right? In my mind, that you have to figure out,
so basically
simple
the
things.
contours for smart cities could be, they would be differing from one state to the other.
Right.
I think capacity building within urban administrators is a big issue as far as developing smart cities is concerned, because this is a new concept, and the urban administrators are not in tune with the times. They are following traditional planning and infrastructure provisioning methods, and I feel that there should a certain part of the smart city budget should be allocated exclusively for capacity building within the urban administrators and institutions, so that they can effectively utilize that budget. In the absence of that, I think that the money will be lost. We will not be able to reap the benefits that which we plan.
Recommendation. Abdul, yes? Okay, same point.
So let me actually, I think, build on an excellent point that Sudhindra is making. If you have a state government mandating, such certain things being done for a city, the preferences of the citizens of that city do not get captured. You have to have local body elections, which will then mean that the preferences of the citizens of that state are actually represented by the mayor of that city, and that mayor is held accountable for delivering, all the different utilities to that state. Till that does not happen, I think I agree with Sudhindra that, this will remain a chimera.
No, I don't think, I think statements like that, I agree with you, but there is every effort being made in that direction. I don't think, for instance, right now, one of the biggest initiatives of the Telangana government in the area of smart cities is capacity building.
Sudhiran also is making a very important point about capacity building in government. This is a very large issue. I think it's absolutely critical that all government organizations also consider lateral hiring. Right? That way we'll have greater talent coming into government at different stages of the career, right? At different levels of seniority, and it's absolutely critical for there to be new ideas, new skills coming into government. Government is a very important player in our lives.
Okay, that also leads to the question that the success of the whole smart city mission by the government of India, states are going to play a very important role in terms of generating funds, in terms of generating money, and that's going to be a huge challenge. Okay, for example, since we're talking in Hyderabad and you're looking at Kakinada and Vizag, how are states going to cope up with that? And having said that, on those lines, what is expected in the budget? Anyone?
I mean, just building on what Subbu said, I think he brought up an important point that, fundraising must happen with some knowledge of how these funds have been deployed in the past. So, you cannot get in the private sector without changing the incentives for the private sector to get involved in these complex infrastructure projects. It has been fairly difficult, and you've had an exit of a lot of funds from, complex infrastructure projects because the incentives just didn't exist. It could be, poor rates of return. It could be just the duration of the projects, all kinds of things. So I think some of that has to be addressed before this fresh round of fundraising is...
So the most important point that the Prime Minister made when he was the Chief Minister is that the states know their priorities best, and the central government should devolve expenditures to the states. This is what Narendra Modi had said, and I would encourage the Finance Minister to pay attention to those important points and devolve a larger part of the central budget to the states. The Finance Commission did that earlier last year, where the central allocation to the states increased from 30% to 40%. I think it should go up even more. Apart from core expenditures in defense, telecom, foreign affairs, etc., most of these infrastructure type of expenditures should devolve to the states. They know their requirements best. They are in the best place to decide how to expend and what to spend on.
Just to add to that, I think there's been an excellent movement towards competitive federalism, trying to sort of a race towards the top, and that is something that has to be built upon. Because that will then capture the preferences of states. Also, it is important, states need to be able to raise money in bond markets, so that they can actually finance their own projects. That will happen as their, governance and as the finances improve through this competitive federalism.
The budget should give fillip to this particular thought.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Just to wrap up this smart city segment.
The current strategy of government is better, choosing cities based on their capabilities. There are three advantages to this because it avoids political lobbying. They can say that certain parties are in power, that's why these cities have been selected, this is why it's not selected. Second is, I think the implementation comes to the local government. So if the local government is better, if it is capable, then only that city is selected. And also the third thing is return on investment. I mean, entire world is watching on India how it builds on smart cities. So the implementation of local governments on these funds will be a better way to select the cities for smart cities.
Also, Swachh Bharat, Amrut, and all these big campaigns that we have already discussed can also be integrated in the whole smart city mission. Although on paper, but then in implementation, in practicality, how much ground can be covered?
No, but I see, it's not just about Swachh Bharat for these 20 cities or these 100 cities eventually. It has to be Swachh Bharat. I mean, like all of India,
Pan-India.
Right? And pan-India. So, sure, I mean, the smart cities guys can obviously, incorporate this, but I think that mission has a broader agenda in my mind, I mean, it's also and making our country environmentally friendly. I mean, we have to worry about, the impact on environment that we are creating through this urbanization drive, and smart city or not. In either case, we have to worry about it in my mind.
So the most important part about Swachh Bharat is that, not only are cities more livable, people are happier, but also workers are more productive.
With tax breaks.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to add the last piece in the puzzle of the smart cities, the sustainability aspect, the renewable energy. Today we are sitting on rooftop projects which costing around 5.5 to 6 rupees per unit. What we are missing really is the battery aspect of it. And these we need more R&D, as we mentioned previously. We need more R&D to develop the batteries which are economical. Today batteries are very costly, they double the cost of a project. Second thing is, Subbu touched about a very nice point of the bonds. Similarly, we need similar financial engineering in renewable industry. We need tax-free bonds for IPPs. who are the biggest investor right now. We need tax credit for tax investors, which is missing here, which is what led to the boom of renewable industry in the US. So those kind of measures are needed, I think, to push the renewable agenda in smart cities.
Okay, renewable energy agenda in smart cities. And one final point from Soumya on the smart city space.
Not only on the smart city space, on the entire budget perspective. So there was this Raghuram Rajan interview which said there's no budget which is good or bad unless and until you see who are actually benefited. It's a question for all of you. Isn't a value for money audit required for the budget even before it is implemented? Just like how it's done in a United Kingdom or any other place. So your perspective.
This is an excellent point. What Soumya is saying is that government should not only be audited, it should also be evaluated. We should ask ourselves that, government spends so much, part of the GDP. Is there a rigorous evaluation of the different programs that it invests in? And do we understand which are the programs which are worth keeping because they benefit the people of India?
The audit of the way the government spends its money, and it's really important to bring the concept of opportunity cost.
With the budget allocation.
Exactly, budgetary allocations, and it's really important to remember the opportunity cost. So when a rupee is spent actually on, for instance, public sector banks, could that money have been spent actually in something else, what the bang for the buck would have been? And so the evaluation of government schemes in a rigorous manner, taking into account the opportunity cost of that rupee that has been spent, is something that is really worth investing. And I think I would strongly advocate some money being allocated in the budget for creating such capability.
For now, you will have
matrix for audit and
Absolutely.
So
We need to know how our money is being
I think
spent.
there's a difference between auditing and evaluation. So auditing is basically checking if there are no leakages, corruption, so on and so forth. Evaluation is seeing what is the impact of the program. And I think the second part...
and evaluation.
Audit is something government does every day.
But the evaluation is not.
For now, you'll have some post-hoc analysis. You'll figure out how the Sensex moves right after the budget, and you'll have your answers.
Well, on that note, it's going to be time for us to take another break. We've just covered smart cities and also relevant points associated with something very innovative and different that has come up in the discussion the last 15 minutes is that the need or perhaps the requirement for a certain type of matrix, as my panelists have put it, evaluation and audit, robust audit system, not only smart cities but overall budget allocations, whatever has been said and how much has been done and covered on ground in various parameters. A very short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about research and development, employment opportunities, young India, their expectations, because when we talk about Make in India, Digital India, the big campaigns, are they actually generating a lot of employment, and if yes, how much, what's being done on those lines, and what are the expectations in the forthcoming budget, R&D and much more after this break.
I really like cars, so just 2 weeks into the job, they gave me a company car, a big company car. It's got 14 wheels and quite the ground clearance. It can go pretty much anywhere, but it's not the easiest thing to park. The acceleration is decent, the handling is shaky, the engine noise is deafening. AC? Well, you can't have everything, but you know what? I love the gun.
We are India's most exciting workplace, and we are making you an offer. The Indian Army. Live a life less ordinary.
आइए ही मैडम, क्या दिखाऊं आपको?
पहले बताइए, आप BIS सर्टिफाइड ज्वेलर हैं?
क्या जी?
आपकी ज्वेलरी पर BIS और हॉलमार्क का निशान है?
हैं?
आपके पास मैग्नीफाइंग ग्लास है?
आप जासूस है क्या मैडम?
जी नहीं, एक जागरूक ग्राहक। आप भी जागरूक ग्राहक बनिए। ज्वेलरी की खरीदारी करते समय ये सब जरूर जांच लें।
जागो ग्राहक जागो।
बहुत बहुत बधाई हो, आपने अपने बच्चों को पोलियो से बचा लिया। लेकिन जब तक दुनिया में पोलियो का एक भी केस है, पोलियो का खतरा बना हुआ है। इसीलिए अब सरकार देश में पोलियो इंजेक्शन की शुरुआत कर रही है, ताकि आपके बच्चे को मिले डबल सुरक्षा। अब अपने 1 साल से छोटे बच्चे को टीकाकरण सत्र में पोलियो की तीसरी खुराक के साथ जरूर दिलवाएं पोलियो का इंजेक्शन। क्यों राधा, इससे क्या होगा पता है ना?
हाँ दीदी, पोलियो से डबल सुरक्षा हमेशा के लिए।
याद रहे, पोलियो की तीसरी खुराक के साथ जरूर दिलवाएं पोलियो का इंजेक्शन।
अधिक जानकारी के लिए अपने पास के स्वास्थ्य केंद्र, ANM या आशा दीदी से संपर्क करें।
बच्चों, जवाब ठीक से देना और सफाई के 10 नंबर होंगे।
चौंकिए मत, डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया से बचने के लिए ये जरूरी है। आसपास पानी जमा ना होने दें। ड्रम, कूलर, गमले को हर सप्ताह साफ करें। प्लास्टिक के कप व नारियल की खोल जैसी चीजों को इधर उधर न फेंकें, क्योंकि डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया का मच्छर साफ पानी में पनपता है। मच्छरों के काटने से बचें। बुखार में पैरासिटामोल लें, एस्पिरिन हरगिज न लें।
इस बार तो बच्चों ने हमें ही पास कर दिया।
और सफाई के नंबर 100 में से 100।
हाँ।
Welcome back, and now we're going to talk about the wish list of Young India vis-a-vis IT ecosystem vis-a-vis. Is there any need to refurbish as far as the entire IT sector is concerned in terms of budget allocation and also in terms of generating more employment opportunities, the research and development? Does it really require more aggressive look in terms of addressing the wish list to the Young India pertaining to IT and all that and much more? And to do so, just to have quick thoughts to kickstart this particular part of the discussion in budget, Tarun.
The finance minister has to do one thing. They should make sure that there is a tremendous increase in the higher education sector in India. Okay. It will also satisfy the needs of industry to bring more skilled people. What does the finance minister need to do? He needs to invest in technical and vocational training. The number two thing is to increase the universities as hubs of research and innovation. The third thing I would say is that it's very important to have female participation, women's participation in the higher education sector.
R&D and innovation, there are two things that I want to highlight. If you take the ratio of R&D expenditure to GDP and compare India to any, leave alone developed countries, even emerging countries that are actually comparable to ours, we really rank very low. Take China, for instance, almost twice as much as what we spend. That's one. So the input that is going into, the money that is going into R&D is actually very less. Second, think about actually what you and I grew up in imagining a university as a teaching place. But, if you look at the US, which is the hub of innovation, universities are not just teaching places. Universities are places where teaching is done, of course, but there's a lot of research that gets done. So this is really critical. Apart from putting in more money into research, the culture of research is something that has to be really encouraged.
And could that, the systematic way that you're pointing at, could that be also something like promoting more or introducing more student financing schemes in various domains, encouraging...
Right, I mean, just to add, it's really think about, even alternate energy or, some of these very critical sectors for India, right? Because this is where our country is going to struggle, and promoting more research, promoting more idea generation in that space, creating and facilitating that kind of research, either through, standalone institutions, getting private sector involved, reducing, some of these very critical regulatory barriers that, institutions have to face in order to call themselves, research centers or universities. I think that is all going to help, and the government has to critically evaluate, some of these aspects itself.
Deepa.
Just to add to some of this, if I have to paint the innovation picture in this country, right? So we have, and these are just facts. I'm not, saying anything about our innovation potential, but like Subbu said, 0.9% of GDP is gross domestic expenditure on R&D, one of the lowest amongst the BRIC nations. Density of scientific workforce, 160 in contrast to 900 perhaps in China and 3,000 plus in the US and the West. So the inputs to innovation rank one of the lowest. If we look at our patent counts, right, 86% of the patents in the science and technology classes belong to MNCs, multinational companies, and a lot of these patents are refilings. Contrast that to domestic innovation in China, 58% of patents in China are owned by domestic companies. So, in some sense, this brings to fold two things. One, I think we should acknowledge the contribution of MNCs to innovation that happens in this part of the world. There are spillover effects in sectors where these patents are refiled or filed or what have you. There is the industrial activity does rank very high. I have a paper with a colleague here which talks about this and examines this data. The second thing I think is building on what they said, all my other colleagues said, that this education and universities, it's not just about having more research active universities, it's about creating a culture that is conducive to research. We have to remember that, people who drive innovation are iconoclasts. They're non-conformists. They color outside the lines. So, we have to have a culture at universities that is accommodating of people who color outside the lines. And we have to even encourage it.
How do we achieve that?
We have to do it through, autonomy for universities. We have to do it by being forgiving of, people who are irreverent and break the rules. We have to do it by having more emphasis on research and communicating those benefits on a continual basis to all the stakeholders in the economy. All of those are, I think, important ways in which we can communicate, we can strengthen and create that culture.
At terms, on the level of policies and planning, in terms of introducing more IT-based financial schemes to encourage, because when we talk about big universities, we're not only talking about urban India, we're talking about rural India. I mean, when you talk about innovations, you see, at times, and most of the times, you have some brilliant ideas coming from the grassroots level. So when we think of that particular student segment, Harit, your reaction on that as well, the kind of financial schemes, scholarships, just to give fillip to that particular thought, budget should be looking at that.
Just creating a physical space and calling it an IIT or calling it an IIM actually doesn't make it an IIT or an IIM. What has now transpired is that people distinguish between the earlier IITs and the new IITs that have been created because there is a quality difference.
Okay.
It's the people, the professors and the students there that actually lend the quality to that particular institution. And so just creating, n number of IITs, calling them an IIT doesn't, or for that matter, any other institution, doesn't make it an institution of repute. What we really need is actually people, and those people are, unless we invest in R&D, unless we incentivize research, we're not going to get people who actually will be of the caliber that made the IITs and the IIMs of repute.
There should be more research institutes and more funding to the research institutes.
No, I was saying that, and this talks to your point, your question earlier as well, that, how do we view these institutions? Do we view them as educational institutions who are educating large masses of people and generating large swaths of engineers? Or do we view them as research institutions engaged in fundamental research that then makes its way into the classroom to transform our engineers into high-quality individuals? That's the lens shift that I'm talking about when I say you start viewing an institution as a research institution, right? And in that research then also impacts classroom education, which, sometimes is never spoken about.
Incentive allowances for students, Harit?
This quota should be more not based on blanket caste-based quota. It should be based on some sort of measures. Maybe with the financial will that you have, where you are coming from. More than compared to a caste-based blanket, calling someone a
more open, more transparent, and more reaching out.
A political hot potato.
Okay. Just to wrap up, I want quick-fire 3 points from all my panelists. Their wish list from Union Budget 2016-17. First up, Tarun.
Okay, it's fairly straightforward. First is that it's very important to decentralize decision making. The union government cannot solve all our problems. They must think about the states as their partners. They must think of private industry and individuals as their partners. That's number one. Number two is the education sector. I'm a big fan of giving young people opportunity.
Okay.
The future of India is in its youth, right? And so we have to make sure that they feel empowered to contribute to India's success. The third point I'd say is that, look, there's a lot of many people who are excluded from India's growth story, whether they're women, many of whom do not participate in the workforce, or other kinds of social categories. Tuhin talked about them earlier. We have to make sure that we're building a very inclusive society. Dr. Rajan, the governor, talked about tolerance as respect as economic variables. These are the values that will focus us on economic growth and prosperity. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind.
Right. Deepa.
So for me, I think the biggest, spend, I would like to see more spend on social infrastructure, building the social infrastructure of this country. I think, in terms of if we build the roads and the highways, but only 2% of the city's population uses them, or, similarly, we talked about several other things. So I think, more emphasis on social infrastructure, building the capital to drive innovation, etc. The second is startups. Yeah, I think, I would like to see, in addition to, again, carrying the social infrastructure argument forward.
This is from where we started, making the country the startup capital of the world.
Yes, and be kind to MNCs, please.
Okay, be kind to MNCs, all right.
So for me, number one, implement the PGNI committee reform measures for reforming of public sector banks. In particular, the Bank Boards Bureau and the Bank Investment Company should be populated exclusively with banking experts. So make sure that the measures are implemented in spirit. Number two, a minimum alternative tax on agricultural income. I touched upon this already.
So ensuring MAT on agricultural income.
Yes, so there should be a minimum alternative tax on agricultural income. And third, actually, a big issue that confronts us is, the black economy, and therefore incentivizing transactions, non-cash transactions, by penalizing cash transactions. So possibly a tax of about 10% or at least 10%, so that it really bites. Cash transactions must be penalized, thereby really reducing the impact of the black economy.
You've said it all. Finally, Milind.
Okay, so since they've already covered all the points, let me give it to you quickly.
I'm sure there's much more to add to it.
For me, physical infrastructure and logistics, you have to make our supply chains operationally efficient, because that's a big, industry, and to me, if it's not efficient, it's not going to bring the cost down. That'll also bring down your cost of doing business, right? The second biggest thing, I think, is the focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. And the third biggest thing, and which was the point that we had touched on earlier, is evaluation of our budget, how it is implemented, and also look at, critical metrics as to how we, view some of these, changes that we want to do. Because without that, all of this will just be an academic exercise. Though I'm an academic, I like to evaluate also. So.
All right, on that note, it's time to say thank you to all my audience here on this show, and of course the great panelists that we've had a very, very enriching brainstorming session. The points that have come up, the economic variables, micro or macro, all are pointing towards the big 5 ideas that we actually touched upon when we started the show. This is what they are expecting in the forthcoming Union Budget 2016-17 in order for India as a nation to move from developing nation to superpower. Well, they are looking at, in terms of overall expectations, India has it to be the startup capital of the world. India has it to be one of the more premier destinations in information technology. The voice is coming from Hyderabad. India certainly has it when it comes to smart cities being in the center stage of the urban planning, and cities only, the thing is, the way forward in terms of implementing those projects, and that's the big Make in India dream, the big Digital India dream, Swachh Bharat, etc. A pragmatic infrastructure push is definitely required as far as this expectation list and the wish list in the budget is concerned. Thank you very, very much once again, all of you. Well, that's it from here, from Indian School of Business, Gachibowli, Hyderabad. Thank you very much for tuning in. Meanwhile, news and updates continue on your channel, DD News. Namaskar.